Welcome back. It's that time of year for people who look forward to tax refund season. During this time, Americans usually receive a federal refund when they have overpaid yearly taxes or withheld more than the amount they owe. However, the IRS reports that this year, taxpayers may see smaller refunds. Joining me to discuss why we may see this is Senior Tax Partner for the Commission Ent LLC, Jeffrey Almanzar. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us and in
Thank
person
you,
this
thank you,
time.
thank you, thank you for having me.
Now, I want to talk about, the whole idea of like the tax refunds being smaller. Can you just first say how did the stimulus affect how the stimulus may affect what you see in your refund?
Right. So there was a an influx of credits that were given to the public during the pandemic. But as far as the refunds actually being smaller, they're basically just reverting back to 2019 numbers,
Mhm.
right? So whatever refunds you were getting, if the same criteria apply, if you still have the same dependents, you still have the same amount of income, and you pay the same amount of taxes, then your refund should look relatively the same to what they looked like in 2019. So it'll definitely be a difference between 2020 and 2021 because of all the pandemic, all the stimulus. They also raised the child tax credits, but now they just reverted back to what they were in 2019.
So you mentioned something called child tax credit. This was introduced as a new tax benefit, during the pandemic. Can you explain what that is and why people, will no longer see it?
Right. So during the pandemic, what they did is that they started giving people the option to opt in to receive monthly payments in advance, where basically they'll get 6 months of the child tax credit spread out. But that just meant that when you actually file your tax return, that you was going to get that amount taken away from the refund because you basically already received it in advance. So it's basically just a push, a little help while we get towards the tax refund.
Now, there was something also called charitable deductions that may also contribute to the reason why we may be seeing smaller refunds this year. Can you just explain why?
So the charitable contribution deduction was a $300 credit per taxpayer, or $600 if it was a married couple. Um, it's an above the line credit, which means that you get it before the standard deduction. But in reality, if you were to calculate what that $300 contribution actually reflects on your refund, it's like a $50 to $60 give or take of a difference. So of course, I would take $60 right
Right.
now, but it's really not going to break the bank, as far as what that contribution was actually doing for the public. Yeah.
Now, I think that's so interesting that, you say it's like only $50, $60. It's like we all would love that.
Hmm.
But what are your ideas on like when people kind of depend on these refunds to kind of maybe like, oh, we finally got, this lump sum of money, like we could do something with it. What are your thoughts on people who depend on that?
I mean, everyone has their needs,
Right.
and everyone has their struggles, but ideally you would want people to not have to depend on these refunds and to have a plan in place throughout the year to save enough to live below their means, so they're not struggling and catching up to pay their bills. But the reality is that right now a lot of people are struggling, so every dollar counts, and a lot of
Right.
people are looking forward to these tax refunds in order to survive or pay bills, or keep the lights on. So in an ideal world, you want people to spend less. You want them to save more. You want them to be more savvy with their money, learn how to budget, and just focus on what their needs are as opposed to any of the wants right now. So that would be my best advice right now.
Now, in addition to seeing lower refunds, this may be a little bit scary for some people, but they may actually owe taxes this year. What are some of the circumstances that could lead people to have to pay the IRS?
So if they receive a W-2 at the end of the year, then prior to the working year, they would receive a form called a W-4. So on that W-4 is where you make the decision on how much taxes you want taken out. So a lot of people should definitely revise that W-4 and make sure that the amount of taxes that's taken out of their weekly paycheck is enough to cover the taxes that they would owe on the amount of income, so that they were actually come to like a small refund rather than having to pay. So you can actually control that based on how your weekly check looks like every week. So your W-4 would be where you would fix that.
Now, what can people expect in regard to filing now that a lot of those pandemic tax benefits are gone? And I know you mentioned it's kind of like going back to before, but before seems so
Right.
long ago now.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
what should people expect?
Yeah. They should definitely expect the refunds to be smaller than what they were in the pandemic. Um, but it also depends on the situation, because some people actually got higher paying jobs and they started working and they started making more money. Some people are actually getting higher refunds this year because they pay more in taxes. So it's not a one size fits all situation. So a lot of people that did lose their jobs and didn't have income would probably not get a refund this year. So it's all relative to what happened during the year. Um, so yeah, I would definitely suggest everyone hire a professional. And this is the times that you definitely don't want to go blindly into this tax season, and make sure you get everything that you're entitled to.
Now, I was just going to touch on that
Hmm.
because we're now like pretty much approaching that where, it's time to start doing that kind of stuff. How should people prepare? I know there are a lot of online things that help. There are also people that help. What would you suggest people do just to make sure that they're doing things correctly now that we are kind of stepping away from a lot of the pandemic tax benefits and stuff? What should people do just to prepare and make sure that they're filing correctly?
So I suggest a lot of people to open up IRS accounts and to open up New York State accounts, and to have some sort of knowledge of what these websites provide, in the sense of knowing what every other entity is reporting to these companies, in order for you to know exactly what to file. Um, and that will also help you gather all your information. So a lot of people during the pandemic were jumping around from different jobs, and some of them lost track of how many jobs they even worked in. So being able to have access to all these employers and going into your records and say, okay, I have 10 employers that furnish information to the IRS, so I have to make sure that I file these tax returns, reach out to these people to make sure. And then another thing that we do is that we provide all of our clients with a tax organizer. So basically, this tax organizer has all of your previous year tax information, so you can guide yourself from what happened in the last year and see if there's something that you might have missed for this year. So that's also a help in order for you to organize yourself that way as well.
Now, how can people ensure that they're getting the most out of their tax returns? Of course, you don't want to say anything that's false, but
Hmm.
how can they make sure that they're getting the most when they go through this tax season?
It's very hard when you don't have the knowledge of, they say, there's a quote that says, um, you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you're going somewhere, you don't know what questions to ask. You definitely want to be in a situation where you can ask someone or have a conversation where they can uncover things that can help you with your unique situation.
Right.
So if you have a home, if you have a business, if you have an in-house nanny, if you have, a car, if you're doing Uber, all these different scenarios have a different strategy. So you definitely want to interview the people that are helping you and make sure that they have an experience in your unique situation. So I would say try to have conversations, talk to friends and family, and ask them, do they know about this certain, situation that I'm in,
Mhm.
and go based on that.
Now,
Hmm.
when does filing officially begin, and what can I know it may be hard, but
Hmm.
what can people expect to see on their refund, and what can help speed up that process?
So the IRS actually opened yesterday, right? So they're already starting to process tax returns. As far as expediting the process, definitely, having all your information, making sure that you have, your bank accounts up to date, making sure that you providing your tax preparer with any information that might have changed throughout the year, And as far as expediting the process, it's very hard to really pinpoint certain days. You know, the IRS says anywhere between 10 business days to 21 business days. But if you've seen in the news, there's people that have been waiting for a year for a tax return, for a tax refund, and they were super, backed up with staff in the IRS. You would have to wait hours just to get someone on the phone. So it's very hard to tell the public, okay, you should expect your refund a certain day. In an ideal world, yes, 10 to 21 business days. But other than that, as long as you file everything and everything is correct. Another thing is that most people that have dependents that are qualifying for the earned income credit will have to wait a little bit longer. Those get pretty much put under a microscope and make sure that these dependents are actually legitimate. So they should be expecting those refunds between the second to third week of February, even if they file today.
Okay.
Right.
Wow. Well, I really appreciate you coming and breaking this down. I know tax season is like so stressful for so many people.
Right.
And as I mentioned, a lot of people do look forward to that like extra cash that they have. So, we truly appreciate you coming in person again to kind of talk to us about this. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was very fun.
If you wish to speak with Jeff about any tax concerns you may have or set up an appointment, please call him at 212-567-3545 or email him at jeff@commissiontax.com. Stay tuned. We have more open right after this.